what data points do you think marketers need to be successful? Because there's always this funny dance that happens at first, right? Where you have this kind of top-down budget, and then you have this bottoms-up budget. And the bottoms-up budget seems to be when the marketer is brought into the fold, but then you have to diagnose what pipeline sources do we have for next year? What are our sales motions that are the same or different? Like, it's kind of a multivariable problem. So I'm just curious, what do you think you need to be successful?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first thing is that a lot of marketers and finance people just don't do the bottom-up version of the forecast. Like, they just take the top-down number and assume it's going to work. And oftentimes, like, I see a top-down number and then I look at like the ICPs you're going after and I'm just like, you can't send 1 million emails when you have 5,000 accounts you're targeting. Like, the math doesn't math. And so for finance and marketing, it makes sense to look at the forecast from both ways, from top down. What do we need to achieve to stay on our overall growth trajectory? What's going to help us hit that? And then what's actually possible when we start at the beginning. And so both of those things are necessary. So I think a lot of teams just don't spend the time to do both. And a lot of finance teams I've seen just like don't necessarily encourage the bottom up forecasting. Like, maybe they say they want to do it and they just don't. Or they start their bottom up forecasting from pipeline, which you can't start from pipeline. You need to start earlier, whether that's if you're doing, like, I recommend if you're using sort of that account-based or account-driven foundation, you start with the number of accounts you have and what market share you think you can get based on what activities. But if you're still in like a lead-driven inbound world, then you're going to start with form fills, or I used to say start with web traffic, but I no longer think you should do that because web traffic is changing so much because of AI. I think there needs to be a shared understanding that you need both. And I think marketing typically needs help with the bottom-up forecast piece. Not all teams. It depends on the size and if you have someone that's really sort of good at that. So I think there needs to be help on that. I think in terms of inputs, I recommend that people kind of do the budget calculations and the forecast in tandem. That only makes sense. And actually just put out this like very basic calculator for marketing budgets. I don't know when this podcast will come out, but we'll just say recently to keep the time a mystery, I made these two tools in Lovable. One was just a basic budget calculator, and it actually bases your budget off of efficiency metrics like CAC ratio and payback period and LTV to CAC and what you're targeting.
On the math problem, Emily, as a CFO, I actually find the marketing back of the envelope math a lot harder than the sales one. Like, with sales, you can try to just do the deterministic price times quantity with reps and ramp them up over time. But you made an astute point that a lot of people stop just at pipeline, like, oh, the sales goal is $1 million, so therefore we need 3x in the enterprise, we need 3 million. You actually have to work backwards to gross up how many compelling events to actually put a receipt on the table.
And you have to look at your historical conversion rates and say, these are our historical conversion rates throughout the life cycle. No, we probably can't like make all of the conversion rates go up at once to possibly hit this number. Like, if we increase the ones more at top of funnel, beginning of the life cycle, the ones that like down funnel, they're going to go down. Like, you can't increase all of these things at once. And so you've got to get the gut check. And the bottom of forecast is really, to me, that gut check of, is this possible? And then diving into, how am I going to do this? Like, what is going to be the biggest lever? And so in theory, you need to build a model that you can say, like, here are the things I think this campaign or initiative will impact. Like, is that actually going to move the needle? So hopefully it's like a living, breathing thing that you can kind of do a quick gut check on some of these activities. And so marketing really does need to understand those efficiency metrics I mentioned and like what they mean and why they matter and how they factor into the things that they do. And then I also think they need finance to be on the same page that, like, hey, when we do this work of like going backwards so we can see if this is possible, like, I need you to give a shit, because that's the frustrating thing. When you're like, hey, finance, I did all this work. Like, this is just not possible. Like, the math doesn't math. I'm not trying to be conservative here. The math doesn't math. And they're like, we can hit it anyway. And you're like, no, but like, really, we can't.
Here's double the target for half the budget. You'll make it work.
I made a mistake on that once, and Kenny, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but I gave this fine gentleman a quota that seemed totally realistic on paper from a dollar perspective. But what we didn't do was the math backwards to say, not only how many deals would he have to close, he would have to close 1.2 deals a day, but how many opportunities that marketing would have to generate for him. And I didn't even give marketing a budget to work for this guy on his behalf. So like, I totally screwed him over in the sense that like, I didn't give him the resources. But like, if I gave that number to the board, they'd be like, oh, it's a quota of $800,000 this year. That totally makes sense. But the math didn't math.
And so many companies just like don't do that work or don't have time to do the work, or honestly don't want to do that work because they just want to like think that they can hit it because that's what they're supposed to hit.
Emily, one thing I struggle with here There's like scaling things that you know work. So you went to an event, you sponsored a booth, whatever. Now you want to do 3 of those, fine, right? If you've never done something before, how do you figure out how much budget you're going to need and how much it's going to generate?
I like to look at, well, what can I spend overall? And then sort of say, well, if I don't exceed this number, like our blended CAC is going to be okay. So I like don't love looking at every single thing in isolation and saying like, well, there's 2 things here. I don't like when people report on such a granular level that they're making micro optimizations because all of marketing needs to work together. And so I see people like this channel within this campaign didn't work. And it's like, well, you have to look at things holistically. So I think it's like kind of a fool's errand to say that every single thing is going to have ROI and we can optimize it within the little thing.
You're kind of taking a broader view and saying some of these things are going to work, some of these things aren't going to work. We're going to improve the performance that we expect in some areas and we might lose in other areas, but it all kind of works itself out in the end.
I'm a big fan of like listing out what I call like your big bet initiatives. And I am a fan of sort of like modeling that out of saying like, what could this do? Where might this hit? You know, what's the biggest gain we've gotten from something kind of similar or something that this targets this audience at this stage in their life cycle? What's the biggest gain we've gotten before? Do you think it'll be bigger than smaller than this? What's the biggest, increase in that conversion after that we've gotten? Like whatever it is, where like what's the biggest swing you've ever had? And you think it's going to be bigger than that or smaller than that? I think that can be a kind of like, what's the elasticity of this metric that we're trying to move? Like, how much does it actually move? Because again, people will be like, we're going to triple this. And it's like, well, you've only ever 1.5 times this before. So how is this program going to be different? But I think if you try to like overthink every dollar you're going to get out of something when you're doing budgeting and forecasting, you're going to get lost in the weeds.
When I went all in on my newsletter, Growth Unhinged, last year, I quickly decided it was time to make the switch to Beehive. I chose Beehive because they're serious about powering the internet's best newsletters. Beehive's all-in-one platform brings together newsletters, websites, and every tool you need to grow and earn. And they keep making it better. You can now launch, host, and monetize your podcast entirely on Beehive. You can host webinars on Beehive, and you can access Beehive through the new MCP. I just use Beehive's MCP in Claude Cowork to audit my site, prioritize SEO fixes, and analyze subscriber trends. It's my newest obsession. If you care about owning your audience, Beehive is a no-brainer. Try Beehive for free by going to beehive.com. That's BEEHIIV.com. Use Kyle30 for 30% off your first 3 months.